Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 60 of Circle of Fellows. My name is Shel Holtz. I am the Director of Internal Communications at WebCorps in San Francisco and the moderator of this panel that features 5 IABC fellows. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a minute. A little housekeeping first. If you tuned in because you had heard earlier that we were going to be talking about branding, events in the world led us to change the theme and concentrate on diversity and inclusion. And we had actually had this discussion several months ago, back on, let's see, it was March 21st of 2019. But because of the current events, we felt that it was important to revisit this conversation, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions during the course of the panel. There are 2 ways to do that. If you are watching directly on YouTube, just use the comment feature on YouTube, and not only can we see those, but I can also share those on the screen, and I'll present those to the panel. If it is easier for you to use Twitter, please feel free and use the hashtag COF60. That's for Circle of Fellows 60, and you can see that in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And we are very anxious to hear your questions. And with that, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. I'm going to go clockwise as I see you on the screen, starting with Rajeev.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rajeev here from India, and my career has been diverse. Initially, I joined the Indian Army and served for 28 years until I exited as a colonel to pursue my career in communication. In the Army, I gained very rich experience in the command of combat units fighting insurgencies and in the front line, teaching at academies and staff assignments in Army headquarters. I was the director of media for the Indian Army also. And then I was deputed to the United Nations Iraq-Kuwait mission after the first Gulf War. Then I went on to earn my doctorate in organizational communication and was a Fulbright fellow in the US at Texas A&M. And I worked with the corporate sector with the Tata Group corporate communication for over a decade, and also taught communication at business schools. Currently, I'm an independent consultant and authoring my 2nd book. Thank you.
Excellent. Great to have you here, Rajeev, late in the evening in India. Next up, we have Tosh.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tosh Hattori from Seattle, Washington. Currently, I'm an organization performance consultant at Ernst & Young, and I work with leaders of organizations to design strategies, cultures, structures, and work that optimizes the success of their employees. I also serve as the immediate past president for an organization called Technology Access Foundation, and we partner with public schools to provide STEM education to young people of color, and also facilitate a professional networking group for teachers of color. Within Ernst & Young, I'm part of the community of practice around DE&I. And so I'm really excited to join a new conversation around DE&I.
As we continue our journey around the clock, you're next, Neil.
Hi, everybody. Neil Griffiths. I'm coming to you from the UK. I've been was working in communication for the better part of 20 years, and most recently appointed Global Head of Diversity, Equality and Inclusion for ERM, which is the world's largest sustainability consultancy. And we are a couple of years into our journey with regards to DE&I in earnest. Looking forward to sharing some of that on this call. Outside of work, I am chairing IBC's task force on diversity, equality and inclusion. And I'm also heading up a similar group for the modern livery company, the company of communicators.
And next we have Priya.
Hello, I'm Priya Bates from Toronto, Canada, and I work in internal communication. I have my own agency here called Inner Strength Communication, where we help enable, engage, and empower employees to deliver results and manage change. I've also started a new venture that's near and dear to my heart, and it's an organization called A Leader Like Me, and really training programs, skills development for women of color right now. And we're also going to be launching our first conferences. So we're excited about that.
And last but most definitely not least is Brenda.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Brenda Siler. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, Silver Spring, Maryland, and I am a past IABC chairwoman. Before that, I chaired the IABC Multicultural Communicators Committee. So I'm excited to be a part of this continuing dialogue about diversity and inclusion. What I do now is work for a communications agency, one of the 14 communication agencies that's working with the U.S. Census Bureau on 2020 census. And I am also a contributing writer for a local newspaper where I contribute articles primarily about theater, music, book reviews, things like that. So I'm happy to be a part of today's discussion.
And we're very grateful to have you here, Brenda. Very grateful to have everybody here for this conversation, which I think we should start by talking about what has changed. Now, obviously, since we talked about this early in 2019, we had the catalyzing events that have elevated the subject of diversity and inclusion in organizations and in society. But as a result of that, what have you seen change in organizations beyond what seems to me to be chasing a shiny object, that this is topical and organizations are jumping on it. And my worry is that when a year goes by and other issues emerge, this is just going to recede into the background. Has anything changed significantly in organizations that encourages you that this is a permanent change?
Well, maybe I can start out with that. I think a lot of people have been interested and have seen what has occurred with the George Floyd situation. And I want to make sure as we go through this conversation and we talk about global diversity and inclusion, that we look at it through a global lens and not just what is happening in the United States. But what I have seen has been what I call a reckoning among a lot of companies, that they are now airing their discretions in terms of how they know that they may have been treating their employees and their customers, their stakeholders. So a lot of companies I see are doing quick fixes, which have been appreciated, where maybe they have put together funds to give to various organizations. They're hiring staff to help work through how that particular company or even an organization like an association or nonprofit can work through and put together strategies. But I'm looking for the long term. I would like to revisit these companies and these organizations in a year to do a check-in to see just what's going and what has going on and what has changed.
I agree with Brenda. I mean, what's great about what we're seeing right now is there's also a lot more reflection about what is the role personally and professionally do we play in the changes, and then that real changes. People are ready to look at the numbers, even though those numbers haven't changed. The way we look at them are changed, and then what we're seeing here in Canada and with the groups that I'm working with is a real action plan forward that's creating that accountability to those results a year from now. And companies, there's a lot of really progressive companies who are are signing on to those action plans and are holding themselves accountable. And that makes me very excited.
Yeah, I'll add to Priya's comment that I'm also seeing that it's shifting from being defined, articulated from the top levels down to the employee level, that employees are being provided safe environments where they can have very open and candid conversations that drive policies, that drive practices within the organization to make sure that they're hearing the different voices and how people are perceiving privilege or inequalities throughout the organization.
How does a communicator factor into all of this? I mean, just from the broad perspective, and we can drill down into details a little bit later, but what is the role of the communicator in promoting diversity, equality, and inclusion in an organization?
Okay, let me start on that question. With regard to the previous question that you raised, I just wanted to say one thing, that whenever a crisis strikes, the spotlights get thrown on a certain issue, and it remains there for some time, and people react and people take action. But the whole idea is that when another crisis comes in, the previous crisis issue is forgotten. And what we need, therefore, is not the immediate reaction, but consistent action on several issues. On the question of inequalities and promoting inclusion, the United Nations had already set the Sustainable Development Goals, and the goal number 10 aims at promoting inclusion of all and reduction of inequalities. Now, governments and business have all supposed to be aligning to these SDGs and reporting their progress on a consistent format and a consistent way. So what's going to change is primarily is the focus that has shifted because of the current happenings. But what we want is a consistent progress on all the issues that reduce inequalities, and also the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 of gender equality is also important, that aims to end all forms of discrimination against all women. Coming to the question of what is the role of communicators, we must understand that this issue of diversity and inclusion is not the responsibility of the communicators alone. It is the top management, it is the policy makers, it is the HR department within the company, which also bears a lot of responsibility in making a diversity and inclusion plan, a policy, and executing it. The communicator is there to support the business objective, to support this objective of reinforcing the efforts of the company on this area. So I would say that the communicator is there definitely, but he has to act in collaboration with the human resources department and with the business leaders in tandem.
Rajeev just nailed it. I mean, goodness me, my mind is bubbling with everything that people have just said there. I mean, absolutely right on. Back to the original question for a second, Shel. I think expectations have changed. That's what I've noticed, internally and externally. I think my colleagues here have sort of hinted at the fact that there is now a desire to see real progress, and I'm certainly feeling that in my role, and seeing a shift in the sort of the demand around performance and the demand around accountability. And I think because of that shift in expectations, organizations can't get away with lip service anymore. They've genuinely got to deliver on this, and they will be held to account. You know, at IBC World Conference, we heard about this notion of glass box brands and how organizations, whether they like it or not, have very transparent outer walls these days that people can see in. And I think that plays a lot into this and raises expectations on organizations to perform. And on the additional question around the role of the communicator, couldn't agree more with what Rajeev says, that, you know, we are not responsible for this as communication professionals. We have a huge role to play, of course, but for me, it's about helping stakeholders who have elevated expectations nowadays, helping to feed those expectations with information, with authentic content around the journey that an organization is on. And because I think that in that context of raised expectations, you can't wait until you've got the perfect polished product. I think it's really important that we communicate throughout the whole journey so that we don't create information vacuums, because that's, I think, where organizations are going to come unstuck.
And to add to that, I'd like to offer a communicator's role and perspective as the eyes and ears of many audiences. If you are in external communications like I am, and you're dealing with the media or you're dealing with other audiences, maybe organizations and companies that your company is a partner with, you're often in a group of people that you can talk to, or they're going to ask you something about what's going on with your company. So it is important to provide that type of intel for your organization's D&I efforts as they put together their groups, their internal groups, and strategies for examining. Also, the communicator's role is going to help the senior management roll out whatever are the principles, the strategies to employees as well as to external audiences. So the communicator needs to be in the room when things are happening, just like in the play Hamilton. You got to be in the room where it happens, so that you're able to articulate what's not clear to you, because trust me, if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to the people that you want to communicate to. So providing that kind of feedback, but helping to craft the messaging, of course, is where the communicator is most important.
I also think that communicators have a very challenging job in making sure that, to Rajeev's point, society tends to focus on what is the most recent incident that has raised concern or issue. And so it's a challenge for the communicators to maintain perspective so that the intent of communications are very clear, and there's careful consideration for intersectionality. How do we make sure that our messages are not favoring one situation or one group, not intentionally, but unintentionally, that creates more divisiveness or more disconnect?
I wonder how important it is when communicating both internally and externally, but I'm thinking mainly internally, to connect these nascent diversity, equality, and inclusion conversations to existing initiatives or statements. I mean, should it be aligned with your corporate purpose? Should it be aligned with your corporate values? One of the things that working in a construction company, we are laser focused on safety. And one of the approaches we're taking to DE&I is to say that safety includes people needing to feel safe when they come to work, safe from racism or other kinds of pressures based on diversity. Is that necessary? Is that advisable that you connect these to your existing initiatives and statements?
I think it's integral, right? And I would say that across the board on any change initiatives, that you start by that foundational messaging. Who are we as an organization? What do we stand for? What do we deliver? What's the services we provide? And the more we can connect these initiatives to those foundational messaging is really important. But also the fact that what I'm seeing that's really kind of changed right now is it's not just about the messaging, it's about embedding it into action. So supporting the leaders in terms of Q&A and how do they do their jobs differently based on the changes that we're proposing, and also the decisions they make. And then we're seeing that embedding, working really closely with human resources on embedding into all of the employee life cycle processes, into recruitment and retention and orientation and all of those pieces, performance management, talent management. So we're really talking about, like, we're getting into the weeds and saying, now what does that mean and how do we communicate and answer the questions so people understand what's different from what we used to do and how we do things, and then how is it ultimately connected to who we are.
There's also a very commercial. Sorry, go ahead, Rajeev.
Sorry. Okay. I agree with Priya that it follows the change management format. The primary thing is for the initiative to start from the top. There has to be the support of the top management, a clear conviction that these things got to be done, and there's got to be a core group on the top which carries the ball forward, and that core group actually transmits all the policies, all the thinking from the top down below, and it permeates into each and every action in the various departments, like Priya brought out in the HR, in the performance management, in how you're doing talent search, in all those integrated actions. This question of communication gets embedded, and diversity and inclusion has to form part of every initiative of the organization. So communicators have then to understand that in each of these, which are the threads which can be tied together to present the correct stance of the organization on the D&I issue.
I was going to add before that this. I think it's if it's not there already, I don't think we're far away from DE&I being included in an indicator of an organization's performance. So it's very much a part of ESG, the environmental, social, and governance sort of performance of an organization. So there's very sort of commercial impacts of this as well. So I think that's going to start to emerge. And I think that consumer expectations, if you're a B2C, client expectations, if you're a B2B, are also going to be elevated. So the performance around this is going to be hugely relevant moving forward. To your question, Shel, around the pieces of organization that where structures have already been well embedded, like safety, and those concepts are really understood. I think that's a huge opportunity for a communication professional to hook into those things, either through a direct connection to some of those programs, or to just use the model, right? So what worked for safety, what worked for sustainability, what are the other big initiatives, change initiatives within an organization that have really worked well, and what can we apply from those lessons into this space?
We have a question, which I'll share on the screen, that I think is related to what we've just been talking about. Communications capacity should lead and exceed even elevated expectations of organization stakeholders. Only then is it truly strategic and planned. Otherwise, it is reactive communications. Any thoughts on that?
We agree.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. Absolutely.
Would you say that what we have been doing so far in the wake of the George Floyd killing has been reactive, and that we need to make that pivot to more proactive communication and action?
Let me give you an example that I saw here in Canada. The group of PR agencies, I can't tell you what they're called. There's an official name for them. As soon as the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement happened, they had a lot of conversations and thinking. And then they came out with a statement that said, we're committed. But what the statement didn't include was an action plan. Mm-hmm. Parallel to that, we have a Black North initiative where a very, incredible leader named Wes Hall here in Canada has led an initiative, and he's had 200 to 300 top CEOs sign a pledge that actually has an action plan associated with it. And the repercussion of that was a lot of conversation and backlash on the PR. Like, think about this, our communications folks, our PR folks, on the fact that they were simply providing empty statements and weren't committed enough to sign the Black North Pledge to make real change. And so they're dealing with a reputation issue right now. And that's been fascinating to watch with the communicators and the communication professionals who should know better.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. So how communicators can lead and exceed, we're currently where we are in society, we're already having to react. And so to Priya's point, great to put together action plans, but then think outside of, it's not just Black Lives Matter, it's all lives matter, all people matter. So how do we put in place strategies, policies, resources that support all people, and make sure that employees within organizations or customers of organizations know where they can report or what resources are available to them when they see instances of prejudice or discrimination within an organization.
And I think the George Floyd situation received so much attention, global attention, and interest and supportive protests. I think because it was real time almost in terms of the videos. People were seeing those in real time. But what we need to remember is that the effort to look at diversity and inclusion in the workplace, we know has been going on for years. And I think there was another key moment 2 years ago with the Time's Up movement, where it was about gender equality in the workplace and women and their role in the workplace, and also salaries and positions. And then before that, it's just been a buildup. When I was chair of the Multicultural Communicators Committee for IABC, I was working for AARP, a US-based organization for people who are age 50 and older. When that diversity conversation was going on in my role with Multicultural Communicators, I had an opportunity to say, okay, you need to look at every aspect of the range of culture. Age is a cultural part that we have to look at. You also have to look at sexual orientation. You have to look at ability versus disability. You have to look at faith in addition to race and to gender. So there's been this slow ramping up with really dealing with diversity and inclusion issues in the workplace, but it's been simmering all along. And this is going to be part of the challenge, trying to help organizations to not look at the total diversity and inclusion playing field as being about race. It's a lot of different things, and you just can't throw a bunch of money at it and think it's going to be over. You have to look at your entire organization, and you have to help your employees, especially, and your senior management, know this is going to take a while. We can do something right away, but don't think that that's going to be it.
Over at WebCore, where I work, where there is a pretty serious initiative underway, again, safety first in construction, but they have been looking very seriously at the issue of psychological safety. The notion that if you are going to be able to bring your whole self to work, you have to feel safe coming to work. Now, all of these strategies that are being implemented in various organizations around diversity, including this look at psychological safety, I think are imperiled by culture. Peter Drucker famously said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. How important is it to address culture hand in hand with the strategies and tactics that organizations are looking at?
You can't ignore the connection, Shel. Simply put, in a way, DE&I is entirely culture based. To the point about psychological safety, you could bring in, promote, develop, oodles of different backgrounds and diverse individuals. But if the environment is not set up to enable them and help them thrive, then those diverse and wonderful individuals will just not stay. They'll go to a place that does make them feel safe, that does make them feel that they can bring their whole self. So culture is 100% connected to this topic.
I think, and the data has told us that, right? The data has said consistently, when you have more diversity in your organization and in your leadership ranks, it is correlated with successful businesses and successful results. And we've been talking about that data for years, but all of a sudden they're paying attention more. And I think you have to believe and make sure that the organization understands that this is about this. There's business success, and being able to listen to perspectives is actually going to lead to more innovation, more engagement, more satisfaction, and more results. And all of those things I've always seen happen, and the data tells us supports that as well.
And it's relentless. Sorry to
Yeah,
put in
no,
again.
absolutely.
The focus on DE&I is absolutely relentless. And
Right.
I think that's what's kind of scary for a lot of people. It's not just a do this and it's done. It's ongoing.
Yes.
And I just want to pick up on the point about intersectionality, that because Tosh touched on it earlier. Because you might have a program for women and that builds women in leadership, and you might implement a program like that and then see the pipeline of women going on and feel very happy about that. But you've got to get into the granularity. It's about what, different groups of women, Black women, other women of color, and are they having that same experience? It's not just about the global numbers, and it's complicated. It's relentless, and that's the reality that I think organizations have to accept.
Culture is a really difficult thing for organizations to deal with. And so a lot of folks will say, so we have our values, we have our principles. That's what our culture is. But if you don't look at the structure within the organization and question, does our structure really support and enable us to fulfill our values or live up to our values? And so just, when we think about the traditional hierarchical organization, does a hierarchical organization really support diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Right.
The structures that we put in place that, from a management perspective, aren't always conducive to a open and welcome culture.
We have a comment. Looks like it got cut off, but it starts off saying, I think it's okay to be reactive at the onset. And I'm inclined to agree. I mean, if there are events that put things in motion, it's okay to react to those events and use that as the motivation to take it to the next level and start to be strategic, to start to be proactive and embed these things into your culture and into your processes. One process that is very prevalent in every organization is pay. Our organization spun up a diversity dashboard. So employees can go in and slice and dice the data and see where we're at in terms of diversity at a number of levels. But most organizations are not very transparent about pay. Should they be? I mean, there are other issues that emerge when you're transparent about pay. You may be showing that you're doing well or not so well from a diversity standpoint, but then you get somebody saying, wait a minute, that person's making that much money? I've been here longer and I'm in the same role. How do you deal with the inequities of pay from a transparency standpoint without creating those kinds of issues?
Neil, I'd be interested in what's happening in the UK, starting with I think it was gender pay equity, right? And that's been a little bit more progressive. hasn't it, in terms of setting the standard? And I've been kind of watching from the outside in on what that actually means, but I'd love to understand that.
So just in case people aren't aware of what that means, so we now are, companies over 250 employees have to report on their gender pay gap. It's actually quite complicated and sometimes a little bit misleading because it's not the same as equal pay. Okay. So equal pay is like for like. If a man and a woman are in the same job, they should be entitled to the same pay. And we have legislation that protects that. So it's not about equal pay. The calculations are very complicated, but it's basically about averages. And it's, what is the, if you total the number of males and calculate their total earnings and divide it by the number of employees, what is the gap in terms of the earnings between the males and females by doing those averages? So it's not particularly helpful in many ways, but what it has done is triggered a conversation about equity, and many organizations have to justify internally now why there's such a large discrepancy. There's now suggestions to do the same thing. They're calling it the ethnicity pay gap. And there's a consultation at the moment as to whether or not that should be made a legal requirement as well. The reality is pay and pay structures and pay levels, it's all very complicated. Every organization is going to do that slightly differently. And I think, again, I go back to my point about the danger, I suppose, of bucketing groups, because you might have data on males versus females, but actually, is that telling the whole story? Are minority groups, and are we looking at that in an intersectional way and telling the whole story? So, you could see a data set and feel very pleased with yourself about that, but actually, when you dig into the granularity, it's not the same sort of picture.
I think that this is definitely a very contentious issue. And there are concerns all across the world, especially in many large corporations, that the senior executives are paying themselves unjustified high salaries and bonuses. And one of the ways in which employees judge whether they are adequately valued in an organization is to look at the degree of pay inequality and the differential between what the seniors get paid and what is the median pay of employees within an organization. Now, where does the communicator come into play? The communicator comes into play in managing the perceptions of fairness and equity. And these perceptions can be managed in a proper way if the facts are right. Because what are the kinds of justice that employees are looking for? In this case, particularly on the issue of pay, they are looking for a distributive justice, which means that employees should see the views about the fairness of the salary given, about the fairness of the decisions that are made, and they should be explained the criteria for decision making. And once you explain that the rules or criteria apply to all in the hierarchical chain equally, then the employees feel that they perceive that the system is very fair. So a communicator's role comes into play in managing the perception of employees and explaining them the criteria on how these decisions are arrived at.
One of the roles of the communicator is storytelling. And it seems to me that there is a tremendous opportunity for storytelling here in order to create empathy where maybe empathy didn't exist before. And heaven knows we're hearing tons about empathy these days in marketing and communication. Where I work, we received an essay that was written by one of our employees, a white employee who shared his experience with coming to grips with racism. And that led one of our Black employees to share his own personal experiences being a Black man in America. And both of those were among the most read articles published to the internet in the history of the organization. And we, the communicators, didn't write any of these. We simply took what was submitted to us did our usual edit for style, and then published it. What would you say a communicator can do to tell stories, to build empathy, to create greater acceptance for the tactical efforts of the organization?
I think the big opportunity, I mean, what I've really enjoyed about this time is the focus on lived experiences. It's kind of provided a platform for employees and others to share their real experiences, and I think also with COVID, we've kind of opened the doors to our homes and our families and our disruptions and our dogs barking and all of those things. So there's also kind of on top of that, this whole idea of authenticity. We're allowed to bring our personal to our professional in a way that we've never been asked to before. And I think that, our role is to influence the conversation, not deliver the conversation, and that's bringing the leaders' points of view in front of employees, but allowing now that bottom up opportunity for everyone to share their experiences and and recognize that as well.
I think it's also within the communicator's role to identify or make sure that you're looking at diverse platforms or providing the support. I may not be comfortable going on camera, and so how can I tell my story if the only platform available to me is video? Or I'm not a great writer, and the only platform available to me is to submit my story in writing. And so I think that's where the expertise of communicators, understanding different media and different platforms, and providing support for different individuals, meeting the differences that individuals have in their skill, their levels of confidence, can make sure that all the stories are shared.
One of the approaches that we've taken is to have small group conversations, but recognizing that people aren't comfortable necessarily, everybody, in small group conversations and being vulnerable and exposing themselves there. We've also opened up an anonymous question and comment submittal form, which is being used by a volunteer task force. These are people who raised their hands and said, I want to volunteer to be part of the solution here, to figure out what tactics will be implemented. So I agree with you, Tosh. I think it's important that you give people multiple channels. I want to go back to this notion of reactive and proactive, because what I've noticed is, because this has been a reaction to events in society, is that people have been talking about what is going on and saying we are going to take this more seriously in our organization, but they don't talk so much about why. Beyond the, fairness and justice, of course, are important things, but leaders of organizations have fiduciary responsibilities. And I have heard about employees in organizations who are resisting this movement, not out of any inherent racism, but out of the fear that this is going to end the hiring and promoting of people based on merit. And I have read a ton about meritocracy, and I don't buy it, but shouldn't organizations be talking about the why and the benefits to the organization of diversity? And Neil, it looks like you're ready to take this one.
I just get so infuriated at the suggestion that it's a choice, that there's a choice between either being diverse or being meritocratic. It infuriates me because, of course, you can and should be both, and there's a way to it. So if you're not diverse right now, as an organization, whether that's racial and ethnic diversity, gender diversity, or other kinds of diversity, there needs to be a roadmap towards becoming that, and it's not that it's not that you just go out and hire whoever happens to be there and checks that box. Of course, that individual needs to be qualified and able to do that job. But if you are doing all of the inclusive things that you say you want to do as an organization, there is absolutely no reason why you can't be both diverse and meritocratic, in my view.
Other
And
thoughts?
yes, what you're speaking of, Shel, has been around before in the early to mid 90s, when a lot of organizations were instituting employee orientation workshops, training around sexual harassment in the workplace and diversity. There was a movement inside of a lot of companies where employees were expressing dissatisfaction and being forced to sit in a diversity workshop, primarily the diversity workshops versus sexual harassment workshops, and refusing to participate and go to those workshops. And so human resources departments had to figure out how to manage that. But it comes from a space where if you're not used to being open and receptive to having a discussion, and you're feeling put upon, well, yeah, that resistance can come up. But this has been about for a while. Here in the United States, the Society for Human Resource Management, which is the professional association for people who work in the human resources area and are usually responsible for employee training inside of organizations, have recently done some new surveys every now and then in terms of how people in the workplace feel about racial issues in the workplace. And not surprisingly, the white employees feel everything is fine, is moving along fine. Not so much for the employees of color, who feel that there's still a long way to go. So to me, that establishes a foundation to starting the dialogue and for companies, associations, and nonprofits to look at how they want to approach diversity and inclusion issues in their workplace.
My guess as well, Brenda, is that a lot of those conversations are really founded on fear, because everybody
Yes.
is asking, what does this mean for me? And those are conversations I've had with neighbors and friends and colleagues around the world, that the assumption is that the merit isn't there, that somebody who gets that role, and that's the fear. So a leader like me, I've got diverse women, 30 diverse women in our first cohort. And what are they afraid of is that when the opportunities become available and they get that promotion, everyone else is going to be looking at them saying they were the diversity hire. And and the truth is, they're smart, they're capable, the capacity, the pipeline is there. We have not developed that pipeline, and we haven't focused on that pipeline in order to build it. And it really is, I kind of throw that like foo-foo, that there's a lot of average people who've been promoted who have no business being there in our leadership ranks. And I think the excitement is that meritocracy, agreeing with Neil, that it's not two different conversations. I want the best person to get that job, and we shouldn't be surprised if that best person is a person of color or a woman or somebody who's disabled, whatever it is. I really believe that doing your due diligence and providing the opportunity, the equity in those decisions is going to make a big difference. Also, in terms of providing that diversity of opinion and thought at the leadership table, because there are decisions being made when you have a very homogeneous group that don't actually help the business move forward. And I think that's going to provide the opportunity.
A quick question has
Me
come
share
in.
it.
We can jump back into this conversation, but is there a communications resource for the best phrasing and vocabulary when it comes to DE&I outreach to staff and clients? Anybody know of anything?
There used to be a long time ago, published by IABC, called Without
figure.
Bias. And I wish we could have, because that's a resource that's to me like the Associated Press style book. It's going to have to be updated from
I don't know of one off the top of my head. I know the Center for Global Inclusion probably has a bunch of resources in that regard.
Yeah, and the Society for Human Resource Management may have one. That's something for us to look into.
There's an opportunity there.
Yes, indeed.
I will look to see if we can find one of those, and if so, look at the show notes for the podcast recording of this episode, and I will include a link to it there. And if any of the panelists find something, please send it my way, and I will add it to those show notes. What about diversity training? Does it work? Should organizations be doing it? I remember all of the hue and cry when Starbucks closed their stores to put everybody through diversity training. It was unconscious bias that they were focused on after an incident, I think, in Philadelphia at one of their stores. I haven't heard much by way of follow-up if it actually made things any better. Does it matter?
You're talking about diversity training.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
You're talking about diversity training for employees inside of an organization, right?
Right, yes.
Okay, my first thing is, who's the trainer? What are their credentials? And is there a certification program or a training program to be a trainer? Is there a trainer for that? And then again, it gets back to the principles, the strategies that organization wants to approach and deal with. So there's a couple of things that you want to look at. That's why whenever I see on LinkedIn somebody that gets a D&I position, and then maybe 9 months to 12 months later, they're out of that position, the preparation wasn't there. Something was amiss. The foundation wasn't there from the senior management, and they had unrealistic expectations about what could be achieved in a short period of time. So who's the trainer?
I think that the main problem, can I speak?
Go ahead, Rajeev.
Okay. So in my view, we have to look at certain, issues of, I would call this as cultural incompetence, and where, you're not able to embrace diversity. And in my view, the problem starts at a very young age. It is very important to expose our children to diversity at the very impressionable age. And the role of parents and schools also comes into play. And even then, training can still help as we go along, because we live very isolated lives. There is, neighborhood segregation, school segregation, workplace, social segregation. And there got to be some proactive measures which allow people to mix with each other and have collective conversations and honest conversations, acknowledge the realities, and then you have to prioritize the issue of racial equity, within organization. So I think that training does help. It should be against measures. There got to be a cultural audit to be done. And then what are the weak areas to be identified within the organization, and certain well-planned training programs to overcome the biases that exist within the organization have to be tackled. The whole challenge is about changing the mindset of the employees. And that's the challenge for communicators also.
And I think ultimately it's like everybody has said, that are we simply checking a box to say we did it, or are we actually trying to drive some action and change? So the conversations that I've had here are it's not necessarily called diversity training anymore. It's called anti-racist training or systemic bias training. And it involves a lot of reflection, and it's connecting it to action. With some of my clients, they're actually looking at scenarios, on how in a retail situation, how the people on the front lines treat customers, and what to check and what to watch out for, what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate anymore, and those rules are changing. So I think that they're being very specific. They're being very specific to those businesses. So it's not that generic check a box type training anymore. It's actually looking at what gets us into trouble. What's happened? When does the media all of a sudden go crazy when something happens? And because the people are looking more it's that glass box, that we had talked to with Max Luthi at IABC World Conference. Everything is open. What are you doing about it, and how does it impact your business? So it's been interesting to kind of watch that.
Go
also,
ahead.
What are you willing to? I'm sorry, Neil.
No, please.
It's also what are we willing to do as an organization when we find that individuals or groups are violating what we believe to be fair and equitable or respectful, and so an organization that says, here's our training, we're supporting the ongoing conversations, here are the resources available to you, but when someone raises their hand and says, I see at this level, repeat offenders, what are we going to do about it? Is the organization willing to get rid of them immediately? So we had the news story this morning when I turned on the television about the sports broadcaster who made a homophobic statement, and immediately the organization said, you're out. And organizations need to be willing to do that. Otherwise, there's no incentive for people to really buy into any policies or expressed training.
I was going to make a very similar point, that it's about the action that you take in addition to providing that training. So I won't labor on that point, but I do want to pick up on something you talked about, Shel, which is that you haven't heard what happened at Starbucks afterwards, right? So we knew it was very public about the fact that they did that, but then what? And that goes back to the point I was making earlier about the communicators' role in this, because it shouldn't be that we have that question. We should be providing the information around that. We should be telling that story. And like I said, maybe Starbucks hasn't yet got that perfect polished product that they would like to put out there in terms of the outcome or the big finale that they might want to present. I don't think that matters anymore. It's about the journey. It's where you're at, and you're providing those frequent updates to engage people along your own journey. I just feel like that's going to provide a lot more understanding and perhaps even some goodwill towards organizations internally and externally.
We
agree with Neil.
Hang on, we have a question that came in. Do they put systems in place to measure it? To measure if it is actually impactful, as against waiting for a video to surface online followed by outrage. I think all of us probably love measurement. Is this something that you can actually measure beyond the obvious that we have pay equity, for example?
Well, there is I'm sorry, you were going to say something else, Shel?
No.
Okay.
Over to you, Brenda.
The evaluation and measurement component is important because that's how you report out. And just to build on what Neil was saying, in terms of the Starbucks example, it may not be perfect, but they owe their consumer base, this is what we have been doing, and this is what the progress is that we have made. There has to be some systems of accountability. And I think that a lot of corporations may struggle with how do we make sure that what we're doing makes sense and that we can report it out. Now, in the world of associations and nonprofits, where most of my career has been and where we have all been volunteers, you've got a board. You've got a board of directors that the CEO, the executive director, reports into. So whoever that CEO or executive director is, the board can put in that individual's goals and objectives. These are things that need to be done, and this is how they will be measured, or this is how they will be evaluated. Not a lot of organizations have that type of structure. And even when you look at your board organization, is there diversity on the board? Is there expertise on your board that makes sure that you are working and meeting the standards that you want to achieve as an open and receptive work environment?
Great. We are down to just less than a minute, but we do have one question, and I'd like somebody to take a stab at this with as succinct an answer as you can provide. Should people be fired, lose their house because of uttering a slur? Who wants that one?
I'm happy to take it. I mean, look, if you want to really walk the talk, and you want to, and you're serious about this, yes, because this is really about what you stand for. And if all you're doing is saying that you care about it, and you're not prepared to back that up with action, sorry, that's just against, you know, the organization, what it stands for. And, you know, it should be understood what uttering a slur can do and the impact that it can have. So yes.
Awesome. So I'm sorry, we are out of time, and I have a meeting at the top of the hour that I have to be at. And I still want to let everyone know what's coming up next month on Thursday, September 17th at noon Eastern Time. Episode 61 will address introducing and implementing open book management. Amanda Hamilton Atwell, Jim Schaefer, Brad Whitworth will be with us on that episode. And Tosh, you'll be back for episode 61. So looking forward to that very much. Also, can never leave one of these without offering my gratitude and thanks to Anna Marie Willie for her efforts in coordinating everything behind the scenes. And until next month, thanks very much. Oh, and all of this will be available as both a video replay and an audio podcast within a day or so. So thanks very much to the panel. It's been fascinating. We could have gone on another hour, I think.
Yeah. Great.
But until next month, bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.